Good morning, everybody. Today is January 31st. We are here for the second part of Cantor Naima Hirsch's presentation on Tunisia. I'm Carol Weinshell, Vice President of Program and Membership at Congregation Rodeph Sholom in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The reason I identify myself at every program is so that for the archives, we know where the program is coming from. I heard tremendous raves about Cantor Hirsch's part 1, and so she's back for a command performance on part 2, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to her. And again, I say you're going to learn. You may do some laughing, you may do some crying, but you will really come away enlightened. So Cantor Hirsch, take it away.
Thank you, Carol. The research project, for those who may have missed the first half, it deals with the most important issue in modern Israeli society, the Holocaust, in Hebrew, Shoah. For most Israelis, and indeed for Jews in general, the Holocaust is understood as the murder of 6 million European Jews by Nazi Germany. Most Israelis think that Shoah, as enacted by Nazi Germany, was concerning the annihilation of European Jewry alone. But that definition can be challenged by the experience of my ancestors, the Jews of Tunisia. We contend that the experience under German occupation in Tunisia was a facet of Nazi Germany plan to destroy all of the Jews. In this research project, I spotlighted the city of Tunis, which is the capital of Tunisia, and the period of Nazi occupation in 1942-1943. Today, I will begin the presentation with this bubble, with this section, which is called the final solution to the Jewish question. When we hear that term, we think, oh, there's a solution to a problem, but in fact, we all know that it's really a euphemism for mass murder. The first item we will focus on is a little bit of background of World War II, which I thought was necessary so that we know where the invasion of Tunisia came from. The invasion of Poland, as you may recall, began with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union that enabled those powers to partition Eastern Europe between them. So Germany and the USSR partitioned Poland. Poland is no longer, at this point in 1939, is no longer a country, but is rather part of what the Germans called general government. The invasion of Poland started as a war. They inherited 2.2 million Jews at that point. The ghettoization began in the 1940s, but there was no mass murder, certainly not by the army. If there were murders, if there were starvation of Jews, those acts were done by the Gestapo and the SS. The Germans acted very differently when they invaded the USSR. Invasion of USSR, June 22, 1941, so a couple of years later. At that point, by 1940, they conquered the north of France. We went over it 2 weeks ago. So right now they have Belgium north of France. Italy is part of the Axis powers. 3.5 million German troops were recruited. So they knew the experience of Napoleon, and they were planning on doing better than that and really conquered USSR. Their motivation was what they called Lebensraum. That was one of the keywords that was used by Hitler. He said that Germany needs living space. They need food. They need place for the Germans to settle. And they went into Ukraine, and which was part of the USSR, which is where the breadbasket of Europe was, so that there will be more food and more slave labors for the German people. And their aim was to destroy the Judeo-Bolshevik communist government. There was hatred of communists, hatred of Jews and of Slavs, and Einsatzgruppen who came in behind the Wehrmacht, behind the army, had a specific job to kill Jews, communists, and Slavs. This was a very different kind of war. Very different than the war that they did in Poland. In October 1941, so a few months after the invasion into USSR, Operation Reinhardt established killing centers in Poland. Chełmno, Belzec, and Sobibor were the first three, and then they added Treblinka, Majdanek, and eventually built Auschwitz-Birkenau. Before we got into the Cyclone B, they started with mobile gas trucks, which were not as efficient, and in order to, we know, I don't want to go too much into that part of it, but I think there's a familiar subject on how they escalated the killing and improved the methods. And deportation of Jews from Germany to the east also occurred in October 41. Now that they got a foothold of the USSR, they were able to start deporting Jews to occupied general government, which was formerly called Poland. This is a picture of the invasion of Poland. I wanted to look a little bit at the map. I love maps. I hope you do too. So let's see. This is Germany and general government, Warsaw. So you know that this used to be Poland and Krakow here. The army goes all the way to Stalingrad, Moscow, Leningrad. That's the front line in November 1942. They invaded in the summer, in June, and they were hoping to conquer the USSR, and including those three major cities, by July. July came and went, August, September, October, November. They're not winning yet, but they're getting closer, and they're starving the Russian population. The Einsatzgruppen are following the army, and they are basically doing killing the population along the way. Here is Kiev and Babi Yar. Here is Zhytomyr. Let's see, some famous Krakow, right? We know these places are in the news now. Here's Crimea. Sevastopol, I forgot, I don't know how to pronounce, but anyway, you're familiar with some of these names here. Stavropol, and so forth. So this is the invasion of USSR and the front line in November. At this point, at this point, of the war, the United States is already fighting in the Pacific, and Churchill is asking the Americans, Eisenhower at the time was the chief of the army, to invade North Africa in order to reduce the pressure on the USSR, so that the USSR, so the Red Army, can recover and fight back the Nazi army. So that's very high-end parts of the war. So Wannsee Conference was held in January 20, 1942. It was actually planned for December 9, 1941, but as you recall, December 7, 1941 was the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Hitler subsequently declared war against the United States, and Heydrich has to change the meeting from December to January 20. Wannsee is a suburb of Berlin, and the meeting is known as the meeting in which Eichmann gathered data on the destruction of European Jews. In this particular presentation, I'm going to focus on what he considered France, or shall we say more specifically, imperial France. So Frankreich, the Reich of the French, in the occupied territory, which is the north of France, including Paris, 165,000 Jews. The unoccupied area, 700,000 Jews. Okay, so throughout my presentation, the number 700 will be in red, because you can see that if the continental France has 165,000 Jews, it's hard to imagine that there will be so many more in the south of France. Most of the Jews lived in the Paris environment, in the northern part. So where does the number 700 come from? And since we're looking into the document of the final solution, this is the actual document, we can see general government, which I mentioned earlier, that's Poland, 2.2. Estonia is Judenrein, free of Jews. You see, Estonia. I have it here in English. USSR was estimated at 5 million, and totally they estimated 11 million Jews in Europe. So now the question is, what is Europe? Well, the question in my research, what is Europe? The French government called North African colonies France d'outre-mer, France on the other side of the sea. The colonies are Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And during the war, the Nazi Germany occupied the north part of France, which we talked about earlier. The unoccupied France is Vichy France, and Vichy also include the French North Africa. So that's one way of looking at what we mean by the French Reich. This is a very, very interesting historian. His name is Raoul Hilberg. He is a Jewish Holocaust historian. He wrote his magnum opus, The Destruction of European Jews, in 1961. He was the earliest researcher about the Holocaust. And he used what we call historiography. Historiography, I'll go into that, like what the historian uses for his research. So just a little bit of definition. Historiography is the study of the method that historians used in developing the history as an academic discipline. And by extension, it is the body of historical work on a particular subject. The historiography of a particular topic covers how historians have studied that topic using particular sources, techniques, and theoretical approach. Now, typically, the research method including eyewitness testimony, documents, diaries, and as many resources as they can gather from that period of time. So Raoul Hilberg argued that the eyewitness testimony, i.e. Jewish testimony, Jewish European nations, Slavs, communists, whatever, testimony is not reliable because the memory can be biased, they may have a hindsight understanding of what happened to them, so they can make up a different story, and they may actually intend to mislead the historian. Hilberg spoke fluent German, and he relied completely on German documents during his research. He was heavily criticized by Hannah Arendt and many others, researchers, although Hannah Arendt apparently used his book when she wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem, because she was relying on his research with the data that he gathered. However, they went back and forth. They had some sort of a love-hate relationship between them, between Roel Hilberg and Hannah Arendt. So he wrote a book called The Destruction of the European Jews, and he even put pictures of Jews, but he never used them as the eyewitnesses for his book. So this is what Roel Hilberg said. There was a problem with the numbers. He published during the Eichmann trials, 1961 Eichmann trials, so he even referenced Eichmann. And he said there were problems with the numbers. The Vichy Continental France had 170 Jews. The North Africa Jews were 360,000, and therefore the total is 530, and it's not even close to our number, which is 700. So we'll continue searching for that 700 and see what other historians have done. Okay, so basically we're at the dilemma as to, is Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia part of the final solution? Yehuda Bauer, Israeli historian, Holocaust scholar, professor at Hebrew University, challenged Hilberg methods. He used the historiography in Bauer research. He included talking to eyewitnesses, talking to survivors of the Holocaust. And he says the documents of the perpetrators, the Nazis, very often designed to mislead rather than to inform, to hide rather than to reveal. And here is another sentence. The minutes of the Wannsee meeting were edited and doctored by Adolf Eichmann according to his statement in Jerusalem in 1961. So in his book, Rethinking the Holocaust, Bauer contend that German documents are not reliable enough, and you have to use Jewish eyewitnesses' testimony. A little bit about Yad Vashem in the context of my research. The mantra in Yad Vashem, and it was built so that we will say as Jews, never again. There will never again be a total destruction of the Jews, really, and by extension, total annihilation of any other people. Yad Vashem was created to preserve the memory of the Shoah and used eyewitness. I think we all actually went there or know a lot about Yad Vashem. They're fighting Holocaust deniers. They aim to validate the Zionist project, and they are a Eurocentric institution. What we have here is heads of state. This is Harper from Canada laying a wreath. This is Trump laying a wreath at Yad Vashem. You can see Trump and his wife Melania. Behind them is Jared and Ivanka, Rabbi Lau, the Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and his wife Sarah, and a few other dignitaries. And I think these are US guards. So that's an example. Dignitaries who come to Israel, they go to Yad Vashem. Usually it's the first trip into the country, they go to Yad Vashem. Biden was there during his first year as president, and he also went to Yad Vashem, and he spoke to two Holocaust survivors and kissed them. So we know that it's a very, very important part of Israeli life, is to visit Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem adopted the Hilberg Eurocentric view. Dan Michman is the head of Yad Vashem research, And he said that the 700,000 number is a transcription error and it should be 170. I have here, I copied that document. And he said, like Hilberg, that there were really only 530 Jews in Vichy, France. And he said the number of Jews was 170 and not 700. And what he's thinking is that it was a typo. And he said it's very hard for us to believe that Germans had a mistake because we כל כך מושרשת הערצה לאופן התיעוד הגרמני. We have such respect and respect for German accuracy, we can't imagine that they made a typo in this document. That's his argument. And be it as may, he thinks it should have been 170, not 700. Now come a very recent research by Peter Longerich, a German professor. He wrote many books about the Holocaust. He's a German, non-Jew. He wrote about Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, and the Wannsee Conference. This book, which published 2 years ago, and my history professor sent me this material, and this is his explanation. The Vichy continental France had 165,000 Jews. The North African colonies had 360. So yes, he agreed that there were 525. And then what he thinks that happened to Eichmann, he added in error occupied France of 170,000 Jews, bringing us to 695,000, which rounded up to 700. Now, this is all argument whether or not Tunisia can be included in the final solution. But this is not the end of the conversation, because if Tunisia is part of the Shoah, are all the elements of the Shoah, as we know, the actions of Nazi Germany, do they apply in Tunisia? And I don't want this to take too long, but yes, there was Judenreich in Tunis. There was Judenreich also in other cities like Sfax and Nebel. Anti-Semitism, of course, there was anti-Semitism. Marshal Pétain had here quickly, the legislation of the Vichy government are similar to the Nuremberg law. Okay, so that's an example. Did they have to wear yellow star? Yes, but there was intervention by the Bey, which was the Muslim monarch, and he said that there will be riots in the streets and that the Arab population will be out of control, so they did not enforce it in every city. Yes, there was propaganda against the Jews, but the Arabs really did not buy into it. Yes, there were labor camps, but there was no murder, there was no killing in the labor camp. There was fortification of German position. The Germans were fighting the Allies, and the Allies bombing is really what killed most of our people, and not the German army. Yes, there was Aryanization. Yes, they confiscated Jewish homes and properties, and furniture and radios and machine. And yes, there were taxes and fine of 62 million francs, which is a lot of money now. And it was certainly a lot of money then. And yes, there was some deportation, but again, it was impractical to go across the sea into Europe. But yes, the people were deported, small numbers, to Auschwitz and Sobibor and other concentration camps. And then, interestingly enough, there was research on extermination facilities, including my mother, who told me about it when I grew up. There was an Israeli guy called Naftali Bar-Giora, who actually lived in Kibbutz Dei Eliyahu, where I spent some of my army service. He was envoy to Libya and Tunisia in 1943, and he stayed after 43 because there was no way to get back to Israel. And he said that the Germans attempted to build extermination facilities near Tunis, near Kairouan, and in Hamamlif, in Jebel-Bo, Konin. So apparently there were also testimonies by French and Arab people that there was an attempt to build extermination facilities. So mass murder, no. But death from Allied bombing and from abuse and hunger and all of those. So we have all the elements of the Shoah, but what we don't have is systematic destruction of Tunisian Jews, which brings us to kind of a question that I ask myself, and I still ask myself, even though I did this research, is what caused the Shoah? It's a strange question. To this day, Holocaust historians disagree about the reason for the Shoah, and really what steps led to the final solution. So there's a lot of questions. So the first and probably most interesting initial researcher was Lucy Davidovich. She wrote her books in 1975. So about 14 years after Raoul Hilberg. She relied on him. She read his data, but she read Mein Kampf, and she looked into the reason for the Shoah. And according to her research, there was an intention from Mein Kampf in 1924 to annihilate the Jewish people. It was an idea in Hitler's mind, and then the war enabled him to do it. So she said there were actually two wars going on at the same time. The visible war is what we call World War II. It's the Allies fighting with the Axis powers, visible war going on. Underneath it is another layer, the invisible war, the war that Hitler fought against the Jews. They were hiding it. This was not known. Like I said last time, the Jews in Tunisia did not know about the destruction of European Jews. So that's her intentionalist point of view, in intention with Hitler. The functionalists look at it differently. They said there were a lot of steps. For example, there was a immigration plan. There was a plan to send Jews to Madagascar. There's a plan to ghettoize them, to deport them, to send them elsewhere. But those plans did not work. They were not practical, did not work. So step by step, the Germans have a worsening attitude toward the Jews. The moral decline and barbarism of the Wehrmacht, including and the Einsatzgruppen, which were true believers, and there was power struggle between the Reich upper echelon as to what to do, how to proceed with the war, and they were all seeking approval of the Führer. The more extreme solution, the one of Heydrich and Eichmann, was adopted. So, but again, so Hitler wanted to solve the Jewish problem, and those who suggested the most extreme solution succeeded in their plan. And of course, most historians say it's all a combination, both intention and function, and that's how we get to the final solution. So enough with that. Moving on to, was Tunisia part of the final solution? So if you talk about intention, yes, Nazi ideology did not distinguish between Jews in Warsaw and Jews in Tunis. So from an ideological point of view, intentional point of view, if they could, they would. And that's how the people in Tunisia believe, and in North Africa in general. If they could, they would. They just didn't have a chance to do it. The same steps were taken. I went in the previous, but every step of the way, it didn't work. So you had no extermination. And as I said earlier, the Wannsee Conference did include the Jews of North Africa, but we have here Shoah without extermination. I may also add in this context that there was also no extermination in other countries. For example, in Denmark, most Jews were able to escape overnight to Sweden, And so the Jews of Denmark were not destroyed. They were part of the final solution, but they were able to escape to Sweden. Likewise, the Jews of Bulgaria were saved because their monarch was able to negotiate with the Germans for their release, and they were not deported. I did some research based on Eli Bar-Chen on studying case study to understand the Holocaust and why the Germans did not destroy the Jews of Tunisia. And really, we're doing it because Tunisia was an exception. And what can we learn from it? Maybe when we understand why the Jews of Tunisia were not destroyed, we can understand why the Jews of Europe were destroyed. What are the steps that lead Nazi Germany to be successful step by step, both in terms of ideology and in terms of functionality, to get to the point where they can kill 6 million Jews in Europe? So a little bit about World War II. Hitler blamed the Jews for causing World War II. It's kind of funny to blame the victim, but that's what it did. It was clear in Tunisia that they knew the Jews were Jews, and they abused them and took their property the way they did in Europe. Germans also blamed the Jews for the Allied bombing in Tunis. And in fact, after one very strong bombing in the winter of 1942, the Jews of Tunis had to pay 20 million francs as reparation. So if ideology is the key to annihilation, then the German occupation in 42-43 should have been concluded with the destruction of Tunisian Jews. For example, Hungary was conquered in 1944, occupied for 6 months, same as Tunisia. During those 6 months, the Germans killed 500,000 Hungarian Jews. But they did not do the same in Tunisia. We can discuss it later, but I think you probably know that from Hungary, there was railroads leading directly into Auschwitz, and there was no railroad between Tunisia and Auschwitz. You'll have to go by boat or by airplane, and those are complicated. And the Mediterranean at that point also had some British destroyers, so you couldn't very easily go through the Mediterranean. So anyway, so we talk about transport as one of the issues. If there were orders from Hitler, from the Führer, to destroy all the Jews, then Rauf, we mentioned him last time, he was the head of the SS, would have acted on it in Tunis. If he could, he would. So the question is, was there a direct order to destroy all the Jews when you occupy a country? So what we see from a functional, that's the intentionalist. The functionalist point of view, we see that the Wehrmacht in Tunisia preferred to fight the Allies and fortify its position, while in the USSR, that same army, maybe different people, but the same army, participated in killing Jews even when it hurt their war effort. So let's continue with these points of view. I'm sorry, it's kind of taking you through a lot of text. In Poland, in September 1939, the German army did not participate in mass killing of Jews. The SS did the killing. Later, on the German administrative occupation, the Jews were transferred to ghettos and suffered from starvation and murder. In the USSR, the German army assisted the SS in killing Jews. So that 7 months after Wannsee, that's the question, was that because of Wannsee that they felt more free to act? And in fact, they killed 3 million Slav and 1 million Jews during that USSR occupation. We talked a little bit about Lebensraum, and when we have time after, we'll talk discussion point comparing Lebensraum or living space with manifest destiny and colonialism in general. Manifest destiny, I'm talking about United States really, and what we did to the Indians, and whether or not that affected some of Hitler's decision to go and do something very similar in colonialism in general. The colonialism as taking over the USSR as a colony of Germany. 10 months after Wannsee, in Tunisia, the Wehrmacht did not behave as they did in USSR. They behaved as soldiers as they behaved in 1939. Behave like soldiers. Now, one thing that's very critical in the case of Tunisia is that there was a French governor who hampered Germans' steps. There was a Muslim monarch called the Bey, and there was also an Italian consulate, and they also affected the behavior of the German. And in addition, the Arab population were neutral toward the Jews. They were not anti-Jewish the way the European Christian population was anti-Semitic. So there were some important political pressures, as well as local population being different than in Europe. I think I'm going to, okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to skip this one, sorry. As part of, beyond my research, beyond my paper, I mean, I went and read Timothy Snyder, The Holocaust as History and Warning. Timothy Snyder lives in the area. He lives in the New Haven area. He's a professor at Yale. He gives lecture on history. And in this book, The Holocaust, Black Earth, Hitler's intention to annihilate the Jews. He talks about intention. He talks about Lebensraum, about colonialism, the statelessness of the Jews. So he's really focusing on that. He said, when a country make people stateless, then they become free game. And here he says like this: the Holocaust began in a dark but accessible place in Hitler's mind, with the thought that the elimination of Jews would restore balance to the planet and allow Germans to win the resources they desperately needed. So he wanted Lebensraum, and he wanted to destroy the Jews. Such a worldview could be realized only if Germany destroyed other states, i.e. they destroyed Poland and they were going after the Ukraine, USSR. So Hitler's aim was a colonial war in Europe itself. In the zones of statelessness, almost all Jews died. A few people, the righteous few, aided them without support from institution. So the focus of Snyder is on the state. When there is a state, there is a power that can help people survive. And here is his lesson from the Holocaust. This will be the final conclusion here. The founding father tried to protect us from the threat they knew, the tyranny that overcame ancient democracy. Today, our political order faces new threats, not unlike the totalitarianism of the 20th century. We are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. So with that is pretty much, Sfaradim and the Shoah will be another topic, but I think we did quite a bit. I would like to stop sharing and open up a discussion which can go in various ways. We can talk about you can bring up issues like why the Holocaust occurred, or you can talk about comparing the German invasion of the USSR and Lebensraum with Manifest Destiny in the United States, and really that urge that people have to go and conquer land, conquer people, colonialize them or destroy them in order to provide food for your nation. And in that sense, that's not really, that really never, it's not part of ancient history. We see the USSR, or I'm sorry, no more USSR. We see the Russian invasion of the Ukraine as an example of expansion into another country's territory for the purpose of growing your nation. Okay, maybe NATO has something to do with that as well. But I will stop talking. I really want to hear other points of view. I'm
Nima,
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Lala is not here. Yeah.
from the process itself of the amount of work and research you did, it's just overwhelming. I think it's obvious to all of us that you had to spend an inordinate amount of time just to research alone and then to synthesize the information.
Yeah.
You've done quite a job. It's very, very impressive.
Thank
Really.
you. I'd like to hear also if you heard something about the Holocaust that were surprised, because I was surprised by many things. I was discovering a lot of things. Were you surprised? I mean, we all know a lot about the Holocaust, but was there any point that you say, wow, I didn't know that?
I heard something that I should have heard, something that was missing. As you know, Nima, history tends to be written by the victors, not the losers. And the victors in World War II were the Allies. And the Allies were approached by Nazi Germany prior to World War II to take in the Jews. And the Allies, including England and the United States, refused to take them. And that led to the final solution on the part of the Germans, that nobody wanted them, so the only option they had was to kill the Jews.
Excellent point.
And,
Yes.
and that's the reason why, a major reason why Israel was created, for that very purpose.
Excellent. I did not mention that. That's an excellent point. Excellent point.
The multi-series that, the multi-episode, I should say, series that Ken Burns did on the US and the Holocaust talked about that American attitude about the Jews that has sort of been glossed over in the past. And I think he focused a lot on that, showing the disregard, not wanting, that was going on in this country, which we may be going back to.
Okay, but that's a very important lesson from history, because if Jews of Europe in 1940s had no place to go, yeah, that's a very important lesson. By the way, there were German Jews who found their way to Morocco, and the Moroccan Jewish community took them in. So those who were able to get to North Africa were okay. They well, there were also Jews who went to Shanghai, right? So
It was a large
China, yeah.
Brazil as well.
Latin America.
Yeah, I think Latin America in general.
And some, right, and so those who were able to escape, but eventually, yeah, it became, yeah, the British did not allow Jews to go to Palestine.
Manila.
Yeah, and so no place to go.
In a different context, David is going to get his book. Oh, you're not going
Yeah,
to
I'm
get
gonna
your
get the book.
Okay, David is going to get his book, but I will tell you just a very, very interesting story, not related to what you're talking about, but David goes once a month and as a rabbi to a small community, Benton Harbor, and St. Joe, which is on the west side of Michigan. And they had a small Torah, which they thought was just a play Torah. And he looked at it closely and realized that it was a real Torah. And then we started to try and trace back the genealogy of where did this Torah come from, because it's very small, very, very small. And the seafruit is very beautiful on it. So go ahead, you
So,
take over.
and that nobody knew. I think we tracked it down. A woman on Yom Kippur told me that, oh yeah, that was Rabbi Schwartz's Torah. He had escaped, German Jew who escaped to Manila. And so I have a book now, Escape to Manila, From Nazi Tyranny to Japanese Terror. And it's a fascinating account of a small community that did survive until the Japanese came in. And the Japanese were committed all kinds of pogroms against everybody, but they took a nice, especially the Jews, and it was a small community. And so this is all new history to me. I never thought that the Jews were persecuted in Manila, but there was, the Nazis the Japanese came there and tortured and decimated the community. So, and that came just out of a small little Torah that the people was in the ark for, and they never opened it. And we had a Shabbat when we were reading 3 Torahs. I said, well, let's take a look at this. My goodness, this is a real Torah. And it's about this high. I mean, it's very
So, Rabbi
strange.
Nelson, when we did Hanukkah around the world, and I can't tell you the details, I can only tell you that
I watched
when-
very carefully. You were wonderful.
when we did the Philippines and looked for Jews in the Philippines, that was exactly what we found. It was surprising to me to learn so much as to, how badly the Jews were treated, and that there were synagogues there that were destroyed. I mean, never would I have thought about that. And just yesterday, we did Guam, we went to Guam, and just yesterday I saw that the Marines are now going back to Guam to resurrect, for lack of a better word, a base for protection. And whoever would have thought that a couple of the locations we studied in Hanukkah across the world would be coming back up in the news today. So
I want to say, Naeem, a Cantor Rabbi, isn't it Rabbi now as well? Cantor Rabbi, and the research was unbelievably interesting and fascinating. You have put time and effort in it. I learned a great deal, as did Alicia, and I'm sure that you're going to put it in a book form, aren't you? I hope.
Well, it's a master thesis right now. Maybe it will be a small booklet at some point. I don't know if it will turn
What
into.
I notice is that we used to say, in answer to the question, could it happen here in the United States, in North America? And we'd say, oh, it can't happen here. And now it's a different question. Where would you go when it happens? That's a very frightening change in among my friends. And of course, the difference is there's a state of Israel, and
That's changing too. That's changing too.
No.
Mhm. Okay, so I think the conclusion is that we have to learn Hebrew
Yes, absolutely.
and buy
Hebrew
property
schools have to do a better job. Yes.
and buy an apartment in Herzliya if we can afford it. Oh, wow.
No, among the younger Jews who are my son's generation, they're buying apartments in Israel. They're convinced that they're being proactive. Wouldn't you agree with that?
In his community.
In his community, modern Orthodox,
Mhm,
the next generation.
mhm.
Interesting. Mhm. Okay.
I would like to hear if others are hearing the same, but are asking the same questions among their friends and about, well, where are we going to go? Well, we were planning. Is Canada? No, we said Canada we don't like. We would go to Brazil, but we have the language, but Bolsonaro was worse than Trump. And so I don't want to get too political, but yeah. But we're playing that. It's not a game. It's a serious conversation.
It is.
But you were fat.
You don't want to go to Brazil or Argentina because the economies are terrible there.
Yeah.
It's scary to even that we even have to talk about this. It's just kind of mind-boggling. And the fact that your son and his friends, were probably way ahead of the curve. I don't know that many people are. I think people keep saying, oh, it's going to be better. It's going to be better. And they just aren't thinking about it. So, but it is ultimately very scary.
Yeah. We
And
just,
not everybody every Jew from the United States can fit into Israel.
yeah.
Yes.
We just heard, I didn't see this morning's New York Times, but we heard it because it was a cousin whose synagogue there was a Molotov cocktail thrown in New Jersey. Did that make the New York Times this morning? I haven't seen today's paper yet.
I saw that yesterday, actually.
Yeah. Yes. A white male.
A little cowardly, 3 o'clock in the morning. Throws
Right.
a Molotov cocktail. So you're not going to go to Montclair. My cousin said yesterday. His son-in-law is the rabbi.
Yeah, his escape plan has eliminated Montclair.
It was actually next door to Montclair, Bloomfield. It happened in Bloomfield.
Okay.
It's very frightening. We talk about it, we hear about it all the time, and I think that this conversation is a byproduct of the presentation, Nima, that you made. And I would like to conclude by thanking you again for everything you did, for everything you continue to do, and for sharing this, because you were just fabulous. And I think everybody agrees with that. So we appreciate this. Was a very good ending to your two-part series on the Jews of Tunisia. And maybe when you come back, we'll do more of a travel log and have some laughs from Tunisia. I know you would like that.
Okay.
Okay,
And in the meantime,
you.
Jill, Carol, and I are full speed ahead on planning some kind of celebration in this late spring, early summer, because Cantor Hirsch will become Rabbi Hirsch or Rabbi Cantor Hirsch in April. So we're very excited.
Wow.
That is
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill, and Debbie, Carol, all the organizers. Thank you very much.
We are
Yeah,
very
wonderful.
excited. We're
very
always-
proud of you.
Yes,
Thank you.
and we're always up for a party, but this party is extra special.
And Rabbi Nelson and Alicia, for sure, we will send you the date and we'll talk to see if you're available to do a road trip, but we'll see. We'll once we have a date, which that's a challenge in
We
itself.
love what you're doing.
We love it. We love it.
All right.
Okay, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank Good
you.
day,
It was
everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Very
Thank you,
thoughtful.
Nima. Great job. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.